The Overwatch 2 Halloween Terror event is upon us, and with that brings a new collaboration game mode between Overwatch and Diablo called Trials of Sanctuary. And honestly, this is one of the more fun and replayable PvE little side experiences that we've gotten, so I figured I'd make a quick video going over all of the different upgrades that characters get, how to get them, as well as a few tips I've found for trying to complete the game mode on legendary difficulty, because I was able to do it a couple of times with friends using a pretty basic strategy that I think could maybe help some people who are struggling and still want to get the name card or title. You get the name card for beating expert and then the title for beating legendary. So first, just to go over all of the different upgrades that heroes get. There are 4 different upgrades for each hero, and you will get the same upgrades every time. So if you get all 4 upgrades, then that's it. You got all of them. The order that you get them in will be different though. So some runs you might get your best upgrades immediately. Other times, the best upgrade might be the last one that you get, or if you don't get all of them, you could miss a couple of them completely. So how you get the upgrades is the first upgrade you get from beating the Roadhog boss. You get your next upgrade from killing the Loot Goblin that appears between the Roadhog and Wrecking Ball bosses. Then you get your third upgrade from beating the Wrecking Ball boss, and then finally you get your last upgrade from yet another Loot Goblin that will spawn between the Wrecking Ball and Moira boss fights. So starting with Illari's upgrades, the first one is Augmented Healing, and with this, after healing someone with your Solar Rifle, which is her secondary fire, you and healed allies deal increased damage on your next attack. Next up, we have Violent Outburst, which makes it so that when you use Outburst, enemies that you hit with it will be inflicted with a status effect that makes them take increased damage for a short period of time. Next up, we have Pylon Blast, which allows your healing pylon to deal a burst of damage to enemies that are nearby the ally that is being healed by the pylon. And finally, we have Blighted Sunbeam, which is probably the most fun one to use out of all of them, and it allows your Solar Rifle to create an explosion on fully charged shots. Next up, we have Pharah. Her first upgrade is Judge Evil, which makes her Concussive Blast deal more damage and will also mark enemies that are hit with it with an effect that causes her rockets to home in on them. And this includes both her primary fire rockets as well as rockets from her ultimate ability. Next up, she gets Holy Wrath, which is an upgrade for jump jets that causes them to emit a pillar of flame that will burn enemies and ignite rockets that you fire through it. Pharah's next upgrade is Divine Assault, which basically gives her an entirely new ability that has, I believe, an 8-second cooldown, in which if you press melee, Pharah will charge forward and then explode enemies that are in her path while she is moving forwards. The movement is kind of like Diva boosters, and basically any enemy that you bump into will explode and take a lot of damage. And then Pharah's last upgrade is Purifying Storm, which causes her rocket launcher to fire additional mini rockets. So this is what you probably saw in the trailer, where Pharah fires like 4 or 5 rockets at a time. Yeah, once you get this upgrade, she just always does that. It's probably one of the best ones she can get. Just a straight massive upgrade to her damage. Next up, we have Reinhardt, who I think honestly has some of the best upgrades in the game. First, we have Blessed Barrier. This makes it so that damage taken by allies is redirected to Reinhardt's barrier when he has it out, and his barrier will also emit a shockwave when blocking damage, and this shockwave will deal damage to enemies nearby. Next up, he gets Righteous Charge, which enables his charge to deal increased damage and also makes him completely invulnerable while using it. Really good if you're stuck in a corner or in a bad situation. You can just charge out and just be immune to all damage while doing so. It's a very good upgrade. Next up, Reinhardt gets Blazing Strike, which upgrades his Fire Strike so that it leaves a trail of fire that burns enemies. It basically just leaves a little trail of lava like Torbjorn ult does, and very good for clearing out hordes of small enemies and just dealing good AoE damage. And then lastly, Reinhardt gets Divine Armament, which upgrades his Rocket Hammer so that it fires a beam of light that deals damage on every swing of it. So he now gets a little bit of a range boost with that beam of light. Again, very consistent, very good upgrades for Reinhardt. All of them are pretty strong and very fun to play with. Next up, we have Sombra, who is honestly probably one of the best heroes in this game mode. Her first upgrade is Hunter's Hex, which gives her back her Opportunist passive so that hacked enemies take increased damage, which is pretty damn good. Anything that makes stuff take more damage is good, and Hunter's Hex does exactly that on a character that already just has a lot of damage. Next up, we have Hungering Arrow, which is an upgrade for Sombra's primary that causes it to occasionally fire out a homing arrow. This one's interesting, but it's not as fun as a lot of other abilities. It's just a straight up damage upgrade, but it doesn't really change how you will play the character or do anything super fun. Just occasionally she just splurts out an arrow that will just home in on people so that you can't miss with it and just deal extra damage. It's just some extra damage for fun. Still, it's not bad. It's just more damage, but it's not like Pharah's extra rockets where you can really feel the impact they have and be like, damn, I'm firing 5 rockets at a time. It's just like, sometimes my gun just shoots a little arrow out and it's like kind of cool. But, I mean, have fun with your 5 rockets, Pharah. Next up, for another good ability, we have Dark Recall, which is an upgrade to her translocator that makes it so that wherever you land, it will place a dark cloud that will damage and slow nearby enemies. Pretty good, especially since translocator instantly puts her into stealth. You can use it to quickly translocate into a group of enemies, slow them down, deal some damage to them, and then get behind them and start blasting away. And Sombra's final upgrade is Enfeebling Virus, which is probably one of her best ones. It's an upgrade for virus that causes enemies who die with the virus effect on them to spread the virus to nearby enemies. And this is really good because it gives Sombra a lot more crowd clearing potential, since Sombra's really good in this game mode because he has really good single target damage. She's not that great against groups of enemies, but against the bosses and against really strong enemies that with a lot of health, she is incredibly effective. And this one upgrade makes her pretty good against large groups of weaker enemies as well, but you can't really rely on it because it is a random upgrade that you get. You could get it at the start of the game, or you could get it at the very end. Next up, for Lifeweaver, his first upgrade is Sanctify, which is an upgrade for Rejuvenating Gas, which causes it to create a field that will heal allies and also grants them bonus defense. Next up, he gets Brutal Grip, which I think honestly might be the worst upgrade. It causes Life Grip to damage enemies along its path. With this upgrade, you can now troll your allies and say that you're just trying to deal more damage with your upgrade. It's not really that good because it requires you to just pull an ally away from a position that they wanted to be in order to deal a bit of damage. Next up, we have Thorned Blossom, which is probably Lifeweaver's best upgrade. It causes his healing blossoms to seek and damage enemies after healing an ally. So if you get his attack upgraded to the point where he can heal like 120 health per blossom, then you can throw that blossom, heal someone for 120 health, and then it will go and damage an enemy for 120 health. This is really good because it lets him just pocket people and deal damage at the same time, which is really good, especially on Legendary, trying to clear it without a full squad of cracked top 500 gamers or anything like that. Keeping your team alive against the robots that deal just way too much damage requires Lifeweaver to just perma-pocket his entire team, and Thorned Blossom lets him deal damage while doing so. It's easily his strongest upgrade. Then next up, we have Hallowed Ground, which gives a buff to his pedal platform that when standing on top of it, you get increased attack and healing. I think that Lifeweaver easily has some of the more disappointing upgrades because it's just your platform gives you more damage and healing. Life Grip will now sometimes do something. Thorned Blossom is strong, but it's not like it's fun to use. It's just automatic tracking damage whenever you heal someone. And then Sanctify is pretty good because it just gives you a lot more survivability both for yourself and the rest of your team. But it's also just like, just healing. It doesn't change up his gameplay like a lot of the other heroes have upgrades that do in some way, shape, or form. Speaking of upgrades that change how you play the hero, we have Zarya with her upgrade Triumphant Leap. This gives her a brand new ability activated by pressing spacebar while in the air, and it causes you to leap forward, knocking down enemies where you land. This is just Winston Jump. So Zarya now has Winston Leap when she double presses space, and it will also cause enemies to fall on the ground if you land near them, stunning them for a brief moment. Very fun to use, very cool ability. Zarya easily has the most fun to use abilities and upgrades in the game mode. Next up, we have Menacing Aura for Zarya. This makes it so that her personal bubble will damage and slow down nearby enemies, and the damage that it deals increases with the amount of energy that Zarya has. This basically gives her a Ramattra annihilation effect whenever she uses bubble. Just a large area around her that enemies will be slowed and take damage. Her next upgrade is Rage Strike, which causes an explosion when she focuses her primary fire on an enemy, and also her energy grenades, which are her right click, will deal damage over time. And then for Zarya's final upgrade, we have Frenzy Shout, which is an upgrade for her projected barrier that grants increased attack speed and movement speed to nearby allies. And this literally just triggers Junker Queen's commanding Shout on whatever ally you use the bubble on. And it will affect yourself as well if you're close enough to the ally that you use it on. So you don't get overhealth, but you do just get movement speed, and if you're in the radius, you also get attack speed as well. And very cool ability that lets you do some really jank stuff. Now for some tips for people trying to complete Trials of Sanctuary on Legendary difficulty, the first thing is what heroes you should be using. I think that a lot of them are pretty good. You're definitely going to want a support so that you can keep people alive when everyone starts taking a ton of damage, because bosses deal a ton of damage and some of them get really close to just insta-killing you. They maybe even can just straight up insta-kill you, especially the first Roadhog one, depending on how many health buffs you get from the random chests. So that's Another thing is to always just go through the map and get all of the chests as soon as you can. They'll give you more damage, more movement speed, more attack speed, more health. So just immediately go and get all of the ones that are available. And it does appear that when I've played it, that more will spawn in at different points in the game. I don't know exactly when new ones will appear, but keep your eye out because there will definitely be some new chests with upgrades, or not upgrades, but just stat upgrades, not new abilities, that appear when you reach certain benchmarks in the game mode. But for hero selection, we did it with a comp consisting of Reinhardt, Lifeweaver, Sombra, and Pharah. I can easily see an argument for swapping out Pharah for Zarya for just some additional tankiness, but our main strategy was just Reinhardt and Zarya for a lot of AoE damage to clear out all of the weaker enemies. Meanwhile, Lifeweaver plays up on the high ground and keeps everyone alive the entire time, just refusing to let people die ever. And then Sombra was more of the DPS single target boss killer, while Pharah and Reinhardt would deal damage to the boss, but mainly keep these other enemies in check. Sombra would just focus on bursting down the boss, as well as bursting down the blue robots that spawn, the ones that throw projectiles, because those are a massive problem. On Legendary, they can almost insta-kill you. If we ever lost a game, it was usually to those robots. So Pharah stays mobile in the air with Lifeweaver keeping her up. Reinhardt stays on the ground, dealing AoE damage and keeping all the weaker robots in check. And then Sombra takes out bosses, as well as translocating around and trying to take out any of the blue robots that use projectile attacks. That was our basic strategy for it. And that worked pretty well, especially when we started doing what the second tip is, which is to just try to ignore the mini bosses as much as you can. This isn't a guide for getting, a high score. I don't really know what the optimal way to get a high score would be at the moment, if it would be completing it fast, dealing damage, killing a lot of enemies, etc. But just if you want to complete the game mode and get the achievement and get the title, Hero of Light, pretty cool title, don't you think? Something that you can do is just ignore any of the mini bosses that spawn. The little Orisas, demon things, as well as the Ramattras. Because especially if you have a Lifeweaver permanently pocketing your team, they don't cause that much of a problem. Usually they're just going to stay aggroed onto your Reinhardt, and then your Reinhardt can kind of just keep their attention while also using fire strikes to try and get rid of a lot of the weaker robots. Because the big problem with the mini bosses is they have way too much health. The amount of health that the Orisas and Ramatras have is absurd. There's almost no point in trying to kill them because they have, I swear they have 4 times the amount of health that the actual boss enemies have. It is wild just how long it takes to kill them. A lot of the times earlier on when we lost, we weren't losing to the mini bosses. We were losing because we were trying to kill the mini bosses, and then there would be a lineup of 7 projectile enemies that would spawn and then just execute our whole team via firing squad. So that would be my first tip, is to don't tunnel vision the mini bosses. The Ramatras are kind of locked to their area. If they spawn in a place, their AI is hard-coded to stay there. So if you just go somewhere else, they'll just patiently stand there and wait for you to sew up again to fight. The Orisas will follow you around, but they aren't too much of a problem. The only one you really might want to try and focus down a bit is the Orisa that has the Winston bubble around her, just because the Winston bubble will block healing and make it difficult for your Lifeweaver to keep your team alive. But just treat these mini bosses as a way to pass the time between killing waves of the smaller enemies. Because you can certainly leave some up, but you definitely want to be focusing on getting rid of the projectile enemies when they spawn, and getting rid of big groups of smaller enemies. But when there aren't that many around, then you can go and start trying to deal damage to the mini bosses, because they do drop upgrades for you. They can give you extra damage, extra attack speed, extra health, so they are worth it to take care of. And then the other thing is to always go after the loot goblins no matter what. They will give you upgrades for your abilities, and they will also give you a lot of upgrades for your damage, health, attack speed, all of those. They give a lot more than completing the mini bosses, and they're not too difficult to kill even on legendary. So if one ever spawns, you might just want to book it over there and then try and take them out. And also, if you are worried about the mini bosses, you do not have to kill them to progress in the game mode. You can leave them alive and it does not impact anything. The one successful run that we had, we left one of the mini-boss Orisas alive while fighting Lilith, and the Orisa inevitably showed up in the room we were fighting Lilith in, so we were still dealing damage to her with all of our abilities, with EMPs, Earth Shatters, Fire Strikes, etc. She was still taking a lot of damage. By the time we killed Lilith completely, the Orisa was at 75% of her maximum health. She basically took no damage the entire time that we were fighting Lilith, and we were giving the Orisa her fair share of attention. The mini-bosses just have way too much health. The big Orisa that spawns with Lilith for the final fight does not have a lot of health. You can easily kill that one, but just the mini-bosses are so stupid. They have way too much health. Trying to focus them down will probably lose you the game, because you'll just get overrun by projectile enemies or other types of robots. The last tip I have is particularly for if you're playing as Sombra, because that was the character I played during our successful runs. We did a couple of them. And that is that you can really abuse Translocator to res your whole team in tight situations. That's probably the biggest thing, is that Reinhardt can do this as well because his charge gives him invulnerability to all damage. So he can kind of kite every enemy to a corner of the map if he's the last one alive, and tell his team to gather on the other side of the map and then just charge through everything while taking no damage, and then quickly get everyone back up. And Sombra can do the same thing. You can kind of lead all of the enemies to one side of the map, then throw your Translocator across the center and just completely skip the center of the map, go invis. You can even res someone while you're in stealth, since you get a few seconds of stealth immediately after translocating. And we easily saved our run a few times just abusing those two abilities to recover from certain death situations where there's only one person left alive. Another tip for if you're playing as Sombra, particularly against Roadhog, as Roadhog is probably the most dangerous boss in the entire game, is that whenever you hack an enemy, it will briefly stun them. So you want to use hack whenever Roadhog goes to use his ultimate, because his ultimate is absolutely insane. It will completely shred a Reinhardt barrier and then just kill your Reinhardt, and then everything might just fall apart after that. A Lifeweaver could also grip whoever gets hit with the Roadhog ult, but the Roadhog also is like incredibly fast and can just follow up. It's just such a scary boss for some reason. Much scarier than the other two on the list. So if you are Sombra, you can use the brief stun from your hack to kind of give your team a little bit of breathing room to get away from the Roadhog if he starts to use his ultimate. You can also use it to cancel Lilith's Coalescence during the final boss if he uses it. And yeah, that's it for this video. Please subscribe if you enjoy Overwatch. Hopefully this helps you complete Legendary mode. I think that's a much more achievable thing than some of the previous Legendary challenges, so hopefully people are able to just use this playstyle, team composition idea, strategy, whatever you'd call it, to get a win on it. There might be some easier strats in the future though, because this is all kind of day one stuff. So who knows? So yeah, until next time, see ya.